Hi everybody, I hope you're doing well. For this video, I wanted to speak about the illusion of compulsions and how we can fall for that trap when on the recovery journey. Now, the thing is with compulsions is that they feel good, right? And that is why they are so tempting. That is why it's very difficult to give them up, because they give us that brief moment of respite, in the sense of certainty, the illusion of certainty. It gives us that brief moment of feel good factor. It gives us that comfort, right? And that's why compulsions are so tempting. And yeah, we got to think of it as imagine like you really enjoy eating junk food, right? Pizza and donuts. You get that moment of pleasure and satisfaction from having those, and you want more of that because it tastes good. You get lots of pleasure from that. But then actually, when you look a bit further, if you just carry on eating those particular foods, then you're going to be having damaging impacts on your health, right? Because obviously eating those foods aren't good for you. And that's what we have to realise with compulsions. Although it can make us feel good, the actual long-term effect is very damaging, because it keeps us trapped in the cycle, right? So you do have to be aware of that. Like, that's why it's so difficult to give up compulsions, because they feel good, and the brain is always seeking out that pleasure and that satisfaction, and it doesn't want to go towards discomfort. The brain is the brain likes being comfortable. It doesn't like that change. It likes things where it makes itself feel good and familiar, and that's exactly what compulsions bring. But of course, they don't actually make us feel good. In the long run, they just keep us stuck, right? They keep us very much embroiled in the cycle. And they just keep OCD coming back for more. Okay, so that is why they are so hard to give up. And the OCD brain is always going to look to take the path of least resistance, right? And that path of least resistance is, satisfying those compulsive behaviours that you may have done for a long period of time, right? Again, because it feels familiar, you get comfortable with that, even though in the long run you know that there is going to be some damage that it's causing, like with eating unhealthy food. We still actually engage in those behaviours because we trade that sort of short-term moment of gratification for the long-term suffering. Okay, now, like I said, the brain is looking for the path of least resistance. Okay, and we have to, over time, when it comes to stopping compulsions, we have to go against the grain a little bit and instill those habits that make us take the hard path, right? Which actually in the long run gives us that comfort by recovering from OCD. So we have to look to how we take the path of most resistance, because that's how we get better. Anything in life, business, working out, that doesn't come easy. That doesn't come from feeling good. That comes from toil. It comes from struggle. It comes from facing discomfort. And the best things in life will come around from that, and not the cheap fixes. Like I said there, junk food, pornography, cheap dopamine fixes, scrolling, all of that stuff that comes from the easy route does tend to be problematic, right? So we have to be aware of that. And my compulsions didn't really improve until my habits in my life improved, right? So, for example, if I wasn't working, or if I was sleeping past my alarm, or if I was just having takeaways, or if I wasn't exercising, my brain was being wired to enjoy that path of least resistance. Okay, and that translated across into my compulsions and my compulsive behaviours, and it meant that I was just staying stuck in that. So I had to, rather than just focusing on the compulsions themselves, I had to look at my life around that, and how are my habits, around those compulsive behaviours. And as I improve those habits, again, the brain learns that taking the path of least resistance is most destructive. It takes a hard route. You instill those good habits, and those good habits translate across into your compulsive behaviours. And that's why it's so important that you have healthy habits. That's why it's so important that you have a good life structure. Okay. Now, compulsions will paint the illusion that they are working and that they are justified, right? There were so many ways in which I justified certain compulsions. Not only would I pretend that I wasn't doing them, I would say that, okay, yeah, I actually do need to know this particular thing. for my life, right? And a good example here is, let's say you've got ROCD, right? And because of the crossover with real life, those compulsions can feel completely vindicated. So let's say one of your compulsions is saying, I love you, right? OCD aside, you may find that, yeah, just in like a normal life sense, you would have to say, I love you to your partner, right? Just because that's just what relationships do, OCD or not. But having said that, you've got to be aware of how you may be justifying a compulsion to get certainty there. Is there going to be that urge there where you feel like you have to do that? Is there an objective from saying that particular thing? Are you doing it to offset any discomfort or uncertainty? And how is your track record with doing that? Are you doing it on a more frequent basis than somebody else, for example, right? So again, you will want to be justifying your compulsions and saying that that's vindicated. Another one, for example, might be taking your blood pressure, right? Maybe you've got like a health anxiety fear, and you say that, yeah, I've got to take my blood pressure to know my health's good. Not saying that you can't ever do that, but you've got to be aware of, how that may be pertaining to your fears and how you may be stoking the bear if you do that, and you've got a track record of doing that, and you've got very rigid beliefs and catastrophic thinking around health. You'll find that any sort of behaviour around that does tend to be compulsive, even though you may be justifying it from a life sense to say, well, look, I need, to have good health, right? So you have to be mindful of how you are doing that, and they're going to feel harmless. Just going back to what I said about eating junk food. It's in the moment it feels harmless because you're actually getting that pleasure, you're getting that feeling of pleasure and satisfaction that comes from it. So it's going to feel the furthest thing from harmless. But of course, in the long run, when you look back over many years and you see that you've done that same compulsion, and although it's given you that short-term relief, it hasn't given you that long-term relief and still keeps you stuck in the cycle with chronic physical symptoms, you realise that actually maybe this illusion of certainty and this illusion of comfort and pleasure that it brings is actually not real, because if I look back at where it's got me, it's only got me stuck on the OCD cycle. Okay, and you need to be aware of that. Okay, and there are also times for me as well where even like doing a compulsion didn't deliver on its promise, right? I remember with HOCD, adult content was one of my big compulsions, and it got to a point where even doing that compulsion didn't actually deliver on its promise. In the end, it didn't give me that right feeling. It's like, imagine that you sort of eat 4 or 5 donuts in a row. That 5th donut, you're not going to get the same utility or the same satisfaction from that first one. And it kind of shows you how even when you do get to that point and it's still not delivering on its promise, that just shows you where you're in trouble, basically, because you're still trying to achieve that just right feeling that can't be promised, and it's still not delivering on its promise no matter how many times you've done it before, right? So you do need to be aware of how that's operating. You need to be aware of those subtle little compulsions that maybe you're not also aware of. I had lots of little ones, especially that I noticed towards the end of the journey, that were actually keeping things slightly fueled up. So whether it was, going on my phone after being triggered, or, when I was maybe confronted with a difficult task at work, I would, just go straight on my phone and trying to offset discomfort. It would be maybe, in my case as well, there were times where I would, let's say that I was dating somebody, right? Just in order to offset that discomfort of maybe being with one person, I'd sort of swipe on a dating app just to offset some discomfort, and I'd justify to myself, well, no, I can keep my options open, and again, you have to be careful of how you are fueling the cycle with those subtle little compulsions. And I think, there are going to be lots of sneaky little ones on the way that, again, they have such a crossover with real life that they are going to feel justified, right? But again, you need to try and get into the art of practicing taking the path of the most resistance, right? So like I just said there, if you are in a position where you keep on going on your phone, really trying to monitor and be aware of how you maybe you're picking up that phone in the moment when you feel a bit possessed and you feel like you're not even thinking about it. You need to be aware of how you might be sort of engaging in those behaviours, whether it's, like the dating app example there, what you can do is, when you're in that position with just one person, you can try not to act on that urge in the moment, that compulsive urge in the moment where your brain is almost making you feel like, no, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Just refraining from that and delaying any kind of response to what your brain is initially putting out there is also going to be a way in which you sort of break that compulsive cycle as well. Okay. So yeah, just to recap, like, the compulsions are going to feel real. They're going to feel vindicated. They're going to feel like the easier route to take. And that's where OCD lures you in, because they feel easy, because they feel enjoyable. We just want more of that. And of course, I know Albert Ellis says in his teachings that we want to maximize our enjoyment, right? But not to the extent of surrendering off our future long-term enjoyment when we go for the short term. And that's very much what it is, right? Compulsions are a trade-off. They're a trade-off for short-term discomfort, but they actually just keep us stuck in the long haul. But we'd rather, when we're in the compulsive cycle, there are times when we'd rather have those brief moments of comfort, and overlook the bigger picture of the long-term discomfort, because it can feel like too far away. It feels like it's too much of a task to climb that recovery mountain and reach that, and it just feels so long away. It just feels easier to do the compulsion, because it's like, well, okay, it's so far away, or oh well, this one isn't going to have much impact. But it does. You justify the compulsion. You say to yourself that, oh yeah, just one more, it's not going to have any lasting impact on me. And that's the thing, in the moment when you do that, it's going to feel like you're not going to be able to see the repercussions of that compulsion in the long run, right? Maybe like when you eat something bad, right, you're not going to be able to see the repercussions of that in your sort of your stomach or your internal organs or your body, right? You can't see it. So I guarantee that if you did see the repercussions of maybe having like a bottle of Coke with loads of sugar and acids in it, then I'm sure you'd maybe be a bit more aware of how that could be affecting you. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that, but it's just the analogy I like to paint here. Okay, so there's going to come a day where you have to, really think about the trade-off that you're engaging in with compulsions, right? You have to really think, right, I'm going to risk giving up these comfortable and familiar habits in order to get that long-term peace and that long-term acceptance and that long-term robust recovery. Otherwise, your life is going to be lost to OCD and by keeping it fueled up with doing those compulsions. So yeah, like I said, think about how you may be justifying that. Think about the illusion that those compulsions give. Think about how you may be in denial over certain compulsions. Like I said, I was in denial over that. I justify them and think, yeah, no, it's not a compulsion, it's fine. Whereas in reality, I was still, scared about my core fear pertaining to that particular compulsion. And yeah, like I said, it's gonna feel easier to do them, and we're gonna take the path of least resistance. But over time, we have to practice not taking that path of least resistance, and that comes by improving our habits. Like I said, having a good life structure. That comes by improving our frustration tolerance. It comes by, doing things when we don't feel like it. For example, going to work with chronic physical symptoms, whether it's going to the gym first thing in the morning, waking up and your alarm goes off. All those different things are going to compound and build up that capacity to not keeping to keep on taking the path of least resistance that compulsions want. So in order to really work with those, it is going to be that life overhaul and the realization about what you maybe doing to keep that all fueled up. And it's very, very sneaky. Like I said, there's going to be some main ones. There's going to be some subtle little sneaky ones that may linger around and come down over time. But yeah, you need to be aware of those. You need to be vigilant of those, ensuring that whilst you do work on these, that you are working on your irrational beliefs around that as well. Of course, working on your behaviours and compulsions is a big part of the journey, but you also need to back that up with that belief change and moving towards unconditional self and life acceptance, and also bringing down the catastrophic views on your worst case scenarios too. All right, so yeah, lots of things to think about when it comes down to the illusion of compulsions there.